On behalf of the school board, I'm Carolyn Rye, Chairwoman of the School Board of Virginia Beach, and on behalf of my colleagues, I'm pleased to be here today to present to you the Virginia Beach City Public Schools Fiscal Year 22-23 budget document. This is a representation of what we prioritize as a school board and as a school division. We believe the initiatives outlined in this plan are essential to providing VBCPS students and staff with the supports they need to succeed as they begin to recover from stressors of the health pandemic and continue to focus on the future. Our proposed spending plan includes a well-earned and necessary compensation boost for our employees. In addition to the combined 5% cost of living and step increase, this document provides for an increased allowance for those employees with advanced degrees and a reclassification of teacher assistants and security assistants to a higher pay grade, while offering allowances for those with bachelor's degrees. Further, a division investment of roughly $8.5 million in employee health care premium subsidies is expected to generate up to a 40% decrease or more in employee contribution rates, representing significant cost savings. In total, $49 million in this budget is allocated to additional compensation funding. We had every reason at the time this budget was approved by the school board to believe that these strategies would make us more competitive in the Hampton Roads market, and we remain convinced of the prudence of addressing these long-term unmet needs. That said, new information with respect to salary raises in our surrounding school divisions that will impact our ability to compete from a recruitment and retention standpoint will be shared later in this presentation. This proposed budget also includes funding for additional supports for our English learner and special education populations and the Environmental Studies program at the Brock Center. For the first time in more than a decade, this year's Capital Improvement Program, otherwise known as CIP, provides an opportunity to make more aggressive gains in our modernization and replacement program, ensuring that every student and staff member is in an environment healthy, safe, and conducive to teaching and learning. To that end, the proposed CIP fully funds a new Princess Anne High School and a new B.F. Williams Bayside 6th grade campus replacement, and significantly increases funding for the replacement of Bayside High School. The construction of the classroom addition at Lynn Haven Middle School, which supports the Achievable Dream Academy secondary school program, is funded and underway with a planned 2023 opening. So in closing, even under the extraordinary circumstances of the past school year, I'm so proud to report that our schools have thrived. For example, for the 12th consecutive year, we reached a record on-time graduation rate while continuing to lower the dropout rate. In the first state assessments administered in 2 years by the Virginia Department of Education, our students tested better than those in many local divisions and bested the statewide average. Rosemont Elementary School was one of only 2 schools in Hampton Roads to be recognized by the American School Counselor Association for delivering an exemplary school counseling program. And Windsor Oaks Elementary School was one of only 7 in the entire state of Virginia to be named a 2021 National Blue Ribbon School by the U.S. Department of Education. These accomplishments and so many others are a testament to the great work that goes on in our schools each and every day. I want to personally thank the Mayor and City Council and the Vice Mayor for their ongoing steadfast support of our schools. The board looks forward to continuing our collaboration as we navigate a post-pandemic world and maintain Virginia Beach's renown as a world-class destination for families. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our superintendent, Dr. Aaron Spence.
Thank you, Chairman Rye.
Thank you all, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Wilson, members of City Council. So despite the ongoing challenges that were mentioned of managing education of our future citizens while also keeping them as safe as possible during this health pandemic, we are pleased to present you with a document that reflects and accounts for the resilience and the dedication of our entire staff and a plan to retain them and attract more to join our school division. Something we've learned during the past 2 years is the importance of face-to-face learning, especially for our youngest students. And I'm so proud to note that since the beginning of the 2021-22 school year, we have been able to keep our schools open for instruction 5 days a week. We've worked very closely with the Virginia Department of Health, not only to monitor our layered prevention strategies, but also to track cases of COVID-19 in our buildings and host vaccination clinics in our schools in order to continue to persevere. We know this pandemic has had dramatic impacts on our resources and on our staffs, both instructional and non-instructional, and it's forced, just like you all were just talking about, a focus on our hiring and our retention strategies. But again, we've been able to stay open, and we continue to ensure that our students are loved and cared for, and they feel a deep sense of belonging in our classrooms. And of course, above all else, we've maintained our focus on teaching and learning that meets our highest expectations for students and for ourselves. Our proposed $872.5 million operating budget encompasses the wide range of requirements that it takes to run our schools every day. However, simply moving forward as we have is not enough. We know we have to be more competitive in the job market, not only for educators, but for the support staff who keep our students fed, get them from place to place, and keep them safe within our care. We must plan for and embrace new and better wages if we're going to be able to compete for qualified individuals to fill those positions. Therefore, compensation remains a top priority for the fiscal year 2022-2023 for the school board. Given what our staff members have accomplished in these extraordinary circumstances, we think it's both appropriate and warranted. To keep compensation at the top of our list, we made it a priority to take a careful look at our spending in central office and to ensure we focused on bolstering the programs we have in place rather than focusing on any new initiatives. For the second year in a row, we're recommending a 4.5% increase in cost of living adjustment and a 0.5% step increase for those reaching or below the top of scale for all of our employees. In addition, as you heard a little bit about, as has been recommended by our human resources team, we're also recommending the reclassification of teacher assistants and security assistants to a higher pay grade and providing allowances for those with bachelor's degrees. These decisions are in line with recent actions taken by the board to adjust pay grades for other work groups, including our bus drivers and our custodians. We've also budgeted for increased allowances for those employees with advanced degrees, which is part of a 3-year phase-in that began last year. And because our efforts to secure classroom substitutes during the pandemic with increased pay have proven to be effective, we're also recommending increasing substitute pay from $100 to $115 a day. On top of these pay increases, as was noted earlier, we also thought it was important to make substantial progress on healthcare costs for our employees. We know healthcare costs in our division are currently higher than we'd like them to be and cause us to be ranked amongst the lowest in the 7 cities in terms of our competitiveness for healthcare premiums for our employees. Lowered healthcare costs will make us more competitive in recruitment and retention and will allow us to make substantial gains in those rankings amongst the other school divisions in Hampton Roads. Something that, again, has been a significant challenge for us in the recruitment process. While compensation increases are our top priority, we also have to bolster other resources, particularly for our growing English as a second language families population, by increasing the number of instructional positions across all grades by 8 and adding bilingual support staff to our Family and Community Engagement Welcome Center. To maintain the safety of our learning environment and continuity of operations in times of crisis and disaster, it's become clear to us that we need to hire an emergency manager who will be responsible for disaster mitigation, preparedness, planning, response, and recovery, and help support the school division's emergency operations plan. It's also important to note, at the beginning of the fiscal year 2023, the city and the school division will no longer share legal services. We will bring city legal staff under our budget, our currently assigned city legal staff under our budget, and we'll establish our own legal department with this budget. The reason that we're on such firm financial ground today and why we're able to provide our students and staff with the remarkable amount of support that we did during these extraordinary times is thanks to our award-winning budget staff, our finance staff, and to the support of our school board and to you all, our city council. Together, we've managed to get through this. We've managed federal pandemic relief funding, and we've managed our budget and will continue to do so. And we've proven again and again the importance of our ability to be good stewards of the significant public investment in our schools. I'm very grateful to work for a school division where we do this by putting our students and our staff first and keeping our focus on providing a world-class education. And we're doing just that. As Ms. Rye noted earlier, despite the ongoing pandemic-related, I'm supposed to be clicking along here. I apologize. As Ms. Rye noted earlier, despite the ongoing pandemic-related obstacles, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has continued to thrive. And as you heard, once again, amidst the global health crisis, our graduation rate went up, not down, and I'm pleased that we were able to be together in person for our commencement ceremonies, thanks to some meticulous planning and hard work, and even advocacy on part of some members of our board and council that allowed us to go do that at the amphitheater, which was incredible, and another example of how we love to go the extra mile for our families and our community. In addition to what Chairwoman Rye shared earlier, here are a few more accomplishments from another remarkable school year. Members of that graduating class last year were offered more than $62 million in scholarships, which was a 30% increase over the previous year. Our division teamed up with Naval Air Station Oceano on Project Search, which is a program connecting high school students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to internships and on-the-job training. NAS Oceana is the Navy's first installation in the country to host the innovative program, and our partnership supports our military families and provides pathways to building student independence. And for demonstrating our major commitment to supporting students and families connected to our nation's military, 27 Virginia Beach City Public Schools were named 2021-22 Virginia Purple Star Schools. These are awards presented by the Virginia Department of Education and the Virginia Council on the Interstate Compact on the Educational Opportunity for Military Children. Even when our students could not physically be in our buildings, 1,659 volunteers found ways to continue to help our students and staff and contributed more than 19,000 hours to our school communities during the 2020-21 school year. And we're so pleased that those volunteers are now finding their way back into our buildings. Our Beach Bags program distributed more than 19,000 bags to families in need, and the Virginia Beach Education Foundation gave out $174,000 in grants for innovative teaching and learning in our schools. During the pandemic, our Office of Food Services, Central Office, and school cafeteria staff worked on-site as essential personnel supporting USDA and VDOE school nutrition program efforts to feed our community's children nonstop from the beginning. Our staff offered at times 3 meals per day, as well as 4-day weekend meal bags and 7-day meal packs during school breaks and holidays. And our Office of Food Services served more than 8 million meals between March 17th of 2020, when schools were closed, and June 22nd of 2021. Truly making a difference on child hunger in our community. Our new virtual peer tutoring program has connected 423 student tutors with 677 students this year, and as a part of our continued commitment to carry out Board Policy 5.4, Educational Equity, VBCPS completed a division-wide equity assessment and is in the process right now of working with an administrative equity planning committee to draft our equity plan. Our Department of Technology issued 1,112 hotspots to families to assist with internet access during the pandemic. And for 12 consecutive years, something we're very proud of, we've been named one of the best communities for music education by the National Association of Music Merchants Foundation for our outstanding commitment to the arts here in Virginia Beach. It's important to note that less than 5% of school districts across the nation earn this prestigious award, and Virginia Beach has earned it for 12 consecutive years. In addition to our operating budget, we of course recognize the need for ongoing capital improvements across the division, which is another part of our commitment to ensure that every student and staff member is in an environment that is healthy, safe, and conducive for teaching and learning. This capital improvement program funds the maintenance of nearly 11 million square feet of space by investing in our existing infrastructure through projects such as re-roofing, making HVAC improvements, and replacing outdated playground equipment. And this capital improvement program that we are submitting to you also fully funds the notable projects described earlier. As you can see, we have been building upon the lessons learned over the past years, bringing every bit of innovation and creativity to bear, but we also know there is a great deal of work ahead. Our students and staff face significant challenges as we come out of the pandemic. These challenges are academic, they are behavioral, they are social, they are emotional, and they are economic. And they will take time, energy, and a commitment of this entire community to address to sustain what we all expect from our public schools. But we are committed to make this work. We will do everything possible to keep the children, teachers, and support staff of Virginia Beach safe in our learning environments and to provide them and their families with the tools needed to thrive and succeed in the next school year. At this time, I'm pleased to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Crystal Pate, who will address the specifics of the budget and the funding mechanisms within the CIP.
Thank you, Dr. Spence.
Thank you, Dr. Spence. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Wilson, members of City Council, and Mr. Dehaney. Thank you for this opportunity. Please note that this proposed budget is based on the prior governor's proposed state budget, which is not adopted. As you know, General Assembly is back in special session, and we could see changes to this existing budget depending on the actions coming out of this session, as well as an amendment to their categorical grants fund due to a significant increase in Title I funding and the award of a large ARP HVAC coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery grant that was received in the latter part of this fiscal year and that will likely end with a carryover greater than the proposed budget contingency budgeted in the categorical grants fund for fiscal year 22-23. I'm going to share with you some slides you've seen in the past. I'm trying to figure out where to go. That just shows the school operating fund and varying breakdowns. This slide shows you the total amount of all funds totaling a little over $1 billion, with the operating fund being the largest piece of the budget at 79.6%. This next slide shows you our revenue sources and related percentages that comprise the school operating fund. As you can see, the local contribution from the city is the largest funding source at 49.7%. State funding, including state sales tax, make up the second largest source at 48.2%. The federal source comes in at 1.5%. Other sources of revenue make up about 0.4%, and 0.1% represents the use of one-time funds in our school reserve account. This is the first year we are reducing the amount by 50% of the fiscal year 2022 budgeted amount of approximately $1.3 million. When we look at the school operating fund by major category classification, as you would expect, the instructional portion is the largest at 73.3%. Operations and maintenance is the second largest portion at 11.8%. Both pupil transportation and administration, attendance, and health are coming in at 5.2%, and technology is coming in at 4.6%. It is important to note that these specific categories are prescribed by the State Board of Education and listed in Virginia Code, and our chart of accounts is built around these categories for budgeting and reporting purposes. This last chart shows school operating expenditures by type. As you can see, we're a very labor-intensive business, and combining our personnel and fringe benefits costs total just over 85%. The rest of the other types total a little under 15%, and most of that 15% is non-discretionary due to items such as ongoing contractual obligations, fuel, utilities, etc. So there's only a small percentage of that 15% that allows any discretionary spending or flexibility. So just really quickly, how did we go about balancing the budget for the fiscal year 22-23? This slide represents our proposed revenue estimates for fiscal year 22-23 compared to the adopted revenue for fiscal year 21-22. Based on that latest information we had to date, we are estimating additional revenue over fiscal year 2022 adopted budget from all sources to be almost $47 million. This slide shows you the breakdown of this amount. Over half of this additional revenue, $26 million, is expected from the revenue sharing formula with the city. The revenue sharing formula estimate represents the amount provided in the city's 5-year forecast and is not updated for any additional estimates related to the overperformance of city revenues. The state is expected to increase by $11.6 million, and state sales tax is estimated to increase approximately $10 million. As mentioned during our 5-year forecast presentation, we were going to begin to phase out the use of the one-time funds in the school reserve account. So again, this was the first year that we're proposing to reduce that amount by 50% of the fiscal year 22 budgeted amount. And so that 0.1% I mentioned earlier is being used to balance the budget for fiscal year 2023. In balancing the budget, this slide shows you what items were used to budget and balance to this additional $47 million. It demonstrates that the primary focus of this budget is for compensation for our employees through raises, reclassifications, increased allowances, and better employee health premiums. As Ms. Rye and Dr. Spence highlighted a number of these items in their opening remarks. Their largest use of these additional revenues was to use to provide a 5% raise to our employees. Note that the state is providing us some funding to provide this raise to SOQ positions, and based on our composite index, we are to provide a local match for this group of employees, and in turn, we are funding the raise for our non-SOQ positions. There's also a substantial investment we are making to lower the employee health insurance premiums. Working with our third-party consultant, it was determined with an investment of approximately $8.5 million, we can expect to see a decrease in employees' health premiums in the range of 40 to 50% for active employees and retirees. We also work to keep a permanent increase in the substitute rate, going from the old rate of $100 a day to $115 a day in an effort to continue to recruit substitutes. As mentioned, we are bolstering our resources for our English language learners, families, so you can see the funding listed here for 8 additional ESL teachers and the cost to revise current employee contracts from 10-month to 10-month extended. As Dr. Spence mentioned, we are bringing the legal department into our own house, and that is approximately an additional cost of about $503,000 over and above the amount that we were using to do interdepartmental transfers between the city and the schools. We also began the process of converting our 10-month custodians to 12-month for the latter part of this fiscal year in an effort to recruit and retain staff. You can see the annual cost for this change to continue is estimated at $1.1 million. We have added some funding for technology and system maintenance, such as security software, backup disaster recovery, and computer software like ClassLink for single sign-on access, Let's Talk, a cloud-based administrative communications tool, and Qualtrics, an online survey software. And finally, to balance this proposed budget, we made some baseline adjustments to personnel and fringe benefit line items using current spending levels to establish future funding requirements and realign positions taking into account estimated enrollment. We were also able to do some targeted reductions to non-personnel line items where we believe the budget could be reduced based on expenditure patterns. This slide shows all the compensation items proposed to be funded in the budget. This slide also totals about $47 million, which coincides with our estimated additional revenue for fiscal year 23. The point here is we've taken all the additional estimated revenue and dedicated to some form of compensation. In addition, we also needed to cut some $8 million in the baseline to balance and fund some non-compensation items that needed to be funded. We wanted to be sure that we made it clear that this was our direction we took and that compensation was our focus. This slide touches on a topic I know the city is dealing with as well, but I would be remiss not to share our situation. Even as our proposed budget includes a 5% raise for our employees, since the release of our proposed budget, several neighboring school districts published their proposed raises, and you can see them here on this slide. Chesapeake Public Schools, one of our main competitors for staffing, came in with a 10% increase for teachers, 14% increase for support staff, and 5% for administrative staff, with a statement from their superintendent that any additional monies they receive will be directed to administrative compensation. You can see other neighboring school districts also came in with raises at or higher than Virginia Beach for teachers and support staff. This puts Virginia Beach City Public Schools at a deficit in attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers and support staff. We are at a critical juncture when it comes to the issue of staffing our schools. The fact that these neighboring districts are able to provide their teachers and support staff with higher raises will likely have a significantly negative impact on our school system in hiring teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, etc. A lack of sufficient qualified teachers threatens students' ability to learn, and instability in school teacher workforce, such as high turnover and high attrition, negatively affects student achievement and diminishes teacher effectiveness and quality. High teacher turnover consumes economic resources through costs of recruiting and training new teachers that otherwise could be better deployed elsewhere. Just alone, the inability to hire and retain enough teachers to staff our classrooms when school opens to approximately 64,000 students could result in the need to increase our class sizes in order to utilize the teachers we will have on board in the fall. This last item I'm going to share with you surrounds the potential elimination of the grocery tax to localities. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, we still do not have a state budget. Of concern is the action the state will take regarding the 1% allocation locally received by the city via the general fund, which is shared with the schools through the revenue sharing formula. If the General Assembly takes action to eliminate this revenue source, the estimated impact as a loss of revenue is approximately $13.1 million, with the split between city and schools resulting in an estimated loss to the schools of approximately $6.1 million, which for reference closely equates to a 1% raise for our staff. We cannot stress the importance for the schools to be able to adequately fund competitive compensation for fiscal year 2022-23 and in the future in order to continue to attract and retain highly qualified staff. And I will leave with this. CBS News reported that a survey conducted by Niche.com on the 50 best places to live in America in 2022 among major cities with populations above 100,000, the city of Virginia Beach is new to that 2022 list, and that is thanks in part to its highly rated public schools. At this time, I turn the presentation over to Jack Freeman. He's our Chief Operations Officer to go over our CIP information.
Can I ask a question before he comes up? I'm just, because it relates to CIP, but it deals with compensation. First, I applaud you for putting your discretionary money where you think was most important, but we'll come back to the CIP. I was curious why last February 1st, when you asked for $48 million, $54.9 million back, I mentioned why none of that money went to compensation. I think you could do more than what you've done, and you could fill more of that gap if you didn't accelerate the CIP, but I'll address those questions. But you have assets to use that you didn't use.
Thank you, Ms. Spade.
Good afternoon. I'm Jack Freeman, Chief Operations Officer. As you all know, Tony Arnold, who's been with us for a very long period of time. He served the school division, the facilities team for
Call you Tony, is it okay?
30-plus years. Absolutely not. Nobody else is like Tony. We miss him, but we do have Melissa Ingram with us here this afternoon. She's our new Executive Director for Facilities, so you'll be seeing more of her in the future. For our CIP highlights, construction is in progress for the classroom addition at Lynn Haven Middle School to support an Achievable Dream Academy. Secondary school program, and the project is currently scheduled to be completed in time for school opening in September of 2023. Our next three school replacement projects, Prince Anne High School, Betty F. Williams, and Bayside 6, and the Bayside High School are all included in this CIP, with Prince Anne High School and Betty F. Williams projects both fully funded in the 6-year CIP. You'll also see that through the proposed use of our 2020-2021 reversion funds, together with state construction grants included in the state's proposed budget, that we've been able to provide significantly more funding earlier in the CIP for all of these three much-needed projects, particularly for Bayside High School. This, together with the ongoing PPA process, provides us the opportunity to potentially deliver these three projects sooner than we had previously projected at an overall lower capital cost. Historically, inflation for school construction is about 4.8 to 5.6% annually. So for a high school size project in the latter 2020s, every year that a project is delayed equates to roughly $7 to $10 million of increase in the cost of the project. This CIP, while dedicating resources to long-standing modernization and replacement program, also continues our commitment to maintaining our 11 million square feet of facilities and infrastructure. And I'll let you review this slide.
Any questions?
I was going to wait till the end.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I do have a question. I do believe in the adopted CIP in May of 2021. Both Princess Anne High School and Betty F. Williams were fully programmed and fully funded. Is that not correct? That's my CIP shows that I got from the city saying approved. Is that not correct?
So if I may, can I continue with the presentation and
Oh, I
we'll
thought
take
you
all the
were-
questions at the end?
Oh,
I was just letting you review the slide
Oh.
before I moved on.
I thought you had stopped.
Total projected cost for the 6-year CIP, including appropriations to date, is approaching $650 million, with year one, 22 to 23, proposed at $83.2 million. All these amounts are reflective of alternative A of our funding sources. And here's the breakdown of those numbers. You'll see throughout the CIP the continued use of charter bonds and public facility revenue bonds. a small but steady increase in the use of PAYGO funding from the operating budget. You also see the school board's commitment from last year towards continuing to reinvest at least $11 to $12 million annually in reversion funds into the CIP as previously requested by members of City Council. The single biggest change for this year, for the first time in more than a decade, includes the potential help from Richmond in the form of state construction grants. That's $21.4 million in grant funding, including in the proposed budget. So you're likely aware that the state CIP funding support has not occurred since roughly 2010, when lottery funds, which had previously been directed for education, were incorporated into the general fund. This resulted in a significant delay in school replacement projects. So for example, from 1990 to 1999, funding was available to start construction on 17 schools. From 2000 to 2009, funding was available to start construction on 19 schools. Since 2010, more than a decade, and that's the time frame since that state funding was not available, funding has only supported starting 6 schools. For the next decade, the CIP can support construction starting at 3 schools. If you take a look at 4.1 under the modernization and replacement program in the proposed CIP, you can see the funding challenge that we face with our modernization programs. The next 2 schools after Bayside High School are First Colonial High School and Kempsville High School. Under this CIP, those schools cannot be funded to start construction until 2039 and 2046, respectively. Those are our next 2 schools outside of the CIP. Those schools will be between 76 and 83 years old by the time replacements are constructed. You'll be able to see after studying this funding summary in more detail that the inclusion of state construction grants has provided much needed additional funding in the 3 modernization replacement projects, providing an opportunity to advance these projects sooner. And we're hopeful that this state funding will become a common practice to help sustain a reasonable modernization and replacement program for schools. Because the state construction grants have not gone final, we also included an alternative B in our funding sources that did not include that $21 million. This option reflects 0 in the state construction grants, and that's highlighted in green. And if the state construction grants is not approved, here's the alternative B funding summary. You can see the corresponding year 1 adjustments in green, which include $1 million reduction in renovations, replacements, various, a $10 million reduction in the Betty F. Williams Bayside 6 replacement, and a little over $10 million reduction in Bayside High School. We look forward to working with you to finalize the CIP budget and responding to your questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr.
Okay,
Spence.
Rosemary and John.
Well, thank you. I promise not to call you Tony, so.
I was joking. You can call me whatever you want.
I was joking too. So I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, we did so many, I was around on the school board when we did the bond referendum back that didn't pass in 99, I think it was. But we did fund a lot of schools because back then an elementary school was about $11, $12 million to do. So we were able to get a lot more done and get those under our belts. And of course now an elementary school is going to be $68 million. That's, and I think we did Kellam for about 107, 108 million. And Princess Anne's going to be 162 million, and Bayside's going to be 197 million. So I am getting to a question. It looks like the further out they go, the more expensive the schools are getting. That's the deduction. So are we able to save some money by moving the costs up? I mean, moving the timeline up for Princess Anne and for Betty F. Williams?
Yes, ma'am. So by looking, and that's the 4.8 to 5.6 historical inflation that we've seen, and that's by looking at the last couple of decades back to early 2000. That's the inflation. And when you apply that to a project, a high school-sized project in the late 2020s, what that means is it's on the order of $7 to $10 million. Every year you move it, you're either saving $7 to $10 million or it's going to cost $7 to $10 million more. And that will increase over time, but that's just a target in the late 2020s based on that inflation rate.
So the 162 for Princess Anne, it seemed to me that was the cost before you moved it up. Is that right? Did that cost change any in your predictions?
Oh, for the actual projections, we may have to get that answer for you for how the calculations went to get to that number.
And I know that you're talking about the last three, but those are all high schools, and they're gonna be really big ticket items, and
That's correct.
I just can't wrap my hand around how much they're gonna cost us, but thank you for, and I know y'all build beautiful schools. It's very exciting. I was at Lynn Haven with you a week or so ago with Mr. Bellucci, and getting ready for the Achievable Dream Academy there. So, thank you. Thank
Okay,
you, Mr.
John.
Mayor.
Well, I appreciate you have the luxury of a single mission. We don't. And I think that you do have capital needs. Families have capital needs. They have challenges. And you could often, if you look at the forecasters, would say the cost of materials 2 years out will be less than they are now. So I don't think you can claim linear analysis to more expensive. This is an atypical spike that no one expects to last. But I do want to come back to my question. Is it not true that Princess Anne High School and Betty F. Williams were fully programmed and funded in the CIP we adopted in May of 2021?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and double check. I think Princess Anne was, and this moves it forward. I don't know that Betty F was fully funded.
Well, you go and check to find it was. And I believe this brings it, Bayside was out in 31 to start construction, delivering in, out in the 33s, 34 timeframe. By mind, it was out there, but it was way out there. So we're bringing that in. So I think the challenge that we have, and I'm trying to understand, is given the financial stress that kids might not have at home, at school, they're having it at home when their families can't make ends meet and can't pay their rent, can't pay their utilities, all that stress factor. And we're raising taxes when no one is paying all their health insurance compensation. They're not enjoying that kind of a paternalistic, and the city does it as well. So I'm not making that a bad thing. I'm just saying families aren't experiencing that kind of income protection at their homes. So what is the empirical value, the value added to the student who goes to the new school a year early compared to keeping the schedule like it was, having those cash assets that we provided, and providing those either in compensation to employees where you say you're not competitive, or return it to the taxpayer because they're dealing with issues today. Because the real question is the value added of acceleration of the student versus putting that money in the hands of people who can't make ends meet today. And I know someone must have made that assessment. And I'm also curious as to knowing your new compensation challenges, would you say making sure the students who you say you're having trouble hiring the right teachers with the right qualifications, I'd like that answer to be, we're going to be able to hire the right teachers with the right qualifications, and maybe deferring the construction cost, the construction start to the original schedule, and putting those dollars into getting the right student who for that 5 years is going to get the education that the building doesn't provide. I'm just trying to understand that value choice that you made.
Yeah, I think it probably comes down to this chart here in terms of the funding source for those construction dollars, which is not the same as the operational fund budget.
I agree
And
with
so the operational budget is where we would deal with employee compensation, and we would need to figure out a way to redirect dollars that would come out of this in order to further delay construction projects, and figure out how to redirect those dollars into the operating budget in order to achieve that. So our perspective would have been in this conversation that we would use these revenues for their intended purpose, which would be capital projects, and then the operating dollars for its intended purpose, which are the ongoing costs associated with the
I
things you
would
described.
concur, except the dollars I'm referring to were the dollars that were the ending fund surplus of 2021 cash, which included overperformance of revenues, $10.1 million from the state, and then there was the regular ending fund balance that was just from under execution on both the city and which came up to the $54.9 million. So that was out of our whole about $100 million surplus at the end of last year, budget year. So that was cash. On February 1st, you asked us to deploy that cash to these projects. So that cash could easily, in this budget process, be redeployed because it didn't come from Title I. It was truly fungible dollars. And I mentioned at the time, I was surprised with your compensation issues that you weren't deploying any of those cash dollars to compensation. So they are reprogrammable. Now, I'm thinking they should go back to the taxpayers, but that's another issue. And that's, I don't want to engage you on that. I'm just trying to understand, since those dollars are fungible, and you haven't really started any of that construction, so that other schedule was a valid way of execution, you know, what was the thought process that got you to say, now knowing you have a bigger compensation challenge than you had when you worked at the 5-year forecast, and we both do, and you're telling us that because of it, you are at a risk of not hiring the quality teachers you want, it would seem to me is that would be the first and foremost thing, rather than construction, would be to have the best student, best teacher in the classroom. That's the trade-off I'm trying to understand.
So I'll let Crystal talk a little bit about the reversion funds and the use of those reversion funds and how they can be used. I think everybody understands those are one-time dollars and can't be redeployed over time. So if we were to invest those in compensation, we would then have to, we would essentially be creating a hole that we would have to come back and fill with future revenues. And as you can see up there again, reversion is part of the strategy for school construction, but it is not the entirety of the strategy for school construction. And so those are one-time dollars, and those are projected reversion dollars that would be allocated to the CIP should we see those reversion dollars again. And of course, we anticipate we would, because it's a continued goal of the board to spend down to about 2% of the overall budget because of contingencies that we're concerned about, like fuel costs this year, which have caught us off guard.
I do understand, if I just could come back, I do understand that you retained all the programmed debt service when you got the cash. You held on to all that all the programmed debt that was for those 2 schools. You held on and kept that, so you had net growth because you got cash, and you retained the borrowing, and kept that borrowing that was going to be used to fund those projects. That's why they were fully funded. So you really have a lot more flexibility, I think, than you're acknowledging.
So, and as Dr. Spence said, I mean, it is one-time funding, and I get what you're saying from the overperformance of revenues on both the city and school, and that created that, and we stay within that 2%. Sometimes it gets a little lower than that, it gets a little scary, but that money has to be built into our base for compensation, and certainly to redirect these funds, that would you know, you don't certainly never want to incur debt, and I know you know that to compensate your employees. So to use that part of that 54.9, some of it was CIP, but some of it was also projects and things like that that are ongoing now, that they've been encumbered, they're being spent, things are happening. But if we had said, okay, we're going to take part of that money, which we can't guarantee we'll have this fiscal year or the next fiscal year or the next fiscal year, you might be able to do that one time, but you're going to create yourself a possible bad situation, especially if recession or we have bubbles or whatever. So you know what I mean? I mean, I don't need to tell you that, obviously. Obviously.
Here's the point I'm making, because we're talking about a budget, and you're saying the most important person isn't the structure. No one got smart being in a building, you know, but is the teacher in the classroom, right? So if you're telling us that you have a problem and you don't think you're going to be able to hire the quality that the customer needs and the parents want, because they're not the customer, it's the child, then what we have to have a discussion about is, what does that mean and what obligation we take? Now, some of that money is recurring, so it could be bonuses, but if you're telling me that you're running the risk, a serious risk was the word that you use, serious, then we shouldn't let a serious risk go unaddressed. So that means in the out years, we have an obligation, then we know we got a bill to pay. But if you're telling me that this is the trade-off, to my view is the public's going to say buildings can wait. You know, I'd rather be able to have a tax cut than a new building. I'm just sharing with you a candidness.
Well, the tax cut is a different conversation.
I know that's
relative
not
to
with
this.
you, it's with us.
Right, that's a different conversation entirely. For us, the difference is one-time dollars allocated to the CIP versus ongoing costs that are in the operating budget. And I don't know how to be any clearer about that. The costs that we're talking about for the serious issue that we have of teacher compensation are ongoing dollars. And if every 1% we put into that is 1% we've got to find every year from this point moving forward, or else we're making cuts to employee compensation.
My point is, if you hire the person that you can get, but isn't the person that you want, the only person who's paying the price for that is every student, as long as that person's in the system, by your own comments. So what it really sees, there ought to be a conversation about is if we don't get more money from the state, then we'd have to say we're willing to change the funding formula to make that happen. But I don't want to say we're building buildings and then put teachers that we really say we wish we couldn't have hired in the building to teach our kids. It just seems to be reverse priorities. It's a
Well, I
more
just
different
disagree on-
conversation,
on-
but it is a serious conversation.
No, I agree. It's a very serious conversation around employee compensation. I just disagree that you can combine those two and say that buildings, you can just stop the construction process and take that money and put it into compensation. I just don't think you can.
Well, then I,
Now, if the conversation is, well, we don't want to invest in buildings, and what we would rather do is deal with tax issues and not give the schools funding for buildings, that's a separate conversation that city council and the school board and the public ought to have. But our problem with compensation is an ongoing problem, and it is a significant issue. Just so, for context for the council, we were 100 teachers short at the beginning of this school year. We remain 100 teachers short today. Every time we hire a teacher, we lose a teacher. We have the same problem that's happening over at the city. We have 150 non-instructional staff short, and we remain non-competitive in many of those areas. You all are having the same problems. We looked at our bus drivers, and our bus drivers, you know, they have a CDL. They can go out, they can make $20 an hour driving for anybody, and we're paying them $16 an hour. So we've just had that conversation with the school board about how to address that challenge. So we do have, and I don't want to minimize, we have significant challenges. We also have significant infrastructure challenges and significant building needs, and I recognize we have to balance those. So what we're trying to do is address the building needs with one-time funds and address our other needs with operational dollars that come out of the revenue sharing formula. And I think that that's the one we want to keep looking at. And I would welcome a conversation about adjusting the revenue sharing formula if it's going to help us, but you all have the same problem, and what we've got to figure out is how to grow more revenue for all of us and continue to maintain our focus on that revenue sharing formula and making sure that the money that comes in is well spent, and in our case, that it is prioritized for compensation, which was the focus of this presentation.
our real challenge is the taxpayers can't afford the bill we're giving them. But
Well, I understand, and of course, we're very proud of the public schools, and I think our community is very proud of the public schools, and I think if you ask them, then they'd be willing to support our teachers and understand the challenges we're facing.
Okay, thank you. That was a good conversation. Anybody else?
Excuse me.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.